Hello, I'm your host, Marcus Garrett. Every week I have entertaining conversations with your favorite influencers and entrepreneurs. Now, let's get started with this week's show.
Rahkim Sabree. Tell the people a little bit about you, author, savant. I see you in the E Street. So what do you want the folks to know?
I am really kind of centered around empowerment, and I find in the various pivots that I've taken, and I'll redefine pivot as evolution, if you will. I have touched on a couple of different spaces, right? Writing, speaking, coaching, and really my claim to fame is in a mix between personal finance and firing my boss. So I'm excited to talk about both. And
I think I came to know you from you actually quitting your job. I know that was one of the viral posts that I may have seen. Of course, I don't know what viral means anymore. Can you tell the people, or to the listeners' benefit, a little bit about that story?
Yeah, so I've been working in banking for a decade. I started at 21, and about 2 weeks after I turned 31, I decided that I wanted to go out on my own and pursue entrepreneurship. But that wasn't just kind of like a happy, la la rainbow situation. I was experiencing a lot of stress and anxiety on the job based off of a lot of the success that I was having outside of work. So anytime I would share any good news about a publication that I was featured in or that I was writing for, any good news about any conferences that I was going to speak at, just anything, there was always a question from my manager, my direct manager, around, well, why are you doing this thing? What is your intent as it relates to being here in the company? And we have to document this. There's always a series of, those three things. And so because I had been experiencing a lot, growing my brand and getting the accolades outside of the workplace, I felt that, the skill sets and certainly the attention from an internet perspective would be enough to carry me into entrepreneurship with relative ease. That's a different story. But when I got to that point of just realizing and recognizing that my value as I experienced it outside of the workplace impact was not recognized in the workplace, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to take a chance on myself. And so I submitted a resignation through email at about 9:30 in the morning. And then I tweeted about it, not really expecting it to do anything or go anywhere. And next thing I know, it's viral. I think it was running for about 2 days. There were 2.2 million impressions on the tweet. And I think aspects of the tweet that really kind of caught people's attention were mental health, and then just making the decision to quit your job, right? I think that's a goal for a lot of people. So that launched me into a new stratosphere as it relates to media.
What happened during that? I think you said it was a 10-year period from 21 to 31. Were you always unhappy? Did that stress come over time, or what led to that point where you're like, I need to move on and do something for myself?
I won't say that I was always unhappy. I don't think I knew enough to know what unhappy was. So banking was my first big boy job, if you will. First job that I got benefits, the 401k, all of that. First job that I was ever promoted in. And I experienced rapid growth early on. So my first promotion was about 5 months in. And then after that, there was another 6 months, and I was promoted again. And, the length of time between promotions grew as I kind of climbed up the corporate ladder. But I was a relatively young manager. Definitely kind of like the poster child for what employee engagement looked like. Had a lot of eyes from senior leadership across the two banks that I worked for, and was really positioned for a lot of exposure when it came to this is the example of what you should be. So I really thrived in that environment because I liked the chase. But I guess where that came back to bite me was I was growing and used to growing at a rapid pace. And my expectations around growth ended up outpacing what my direct leadership felt maybe was appropriate or was necessary. And so here I'm like, I want more, I want more, I want more. And they're like, pump the brakes a little bit, like, guy, you're not ready for this. And so I stopped looking for the validation within that corporate space and started building for myself outside of it. And that's where I feel like I was retaliated against. So prior to, I want to say 2018, corporate citizenship was like my focus. That was the thing. I was like, okay, I'm trying to get the most money, the highest position in the shortest amount of time. And then I published my first book, and I'm like, hey, I can do things without having somebody else chime in and tell me whether or not that was okay or appropriate or good, or, have it reflected in my review. So first book published in 2018, second book published 2019, followed by a TEDx talk, first feature in a large publication 2019. And I'm like really feeling myself at this point. And that's where I started to get a lot of the pushback, which made the environment undesirable, because at the same time, I was still pursuing growth. And so anytime I would apply for a promotion or a transfer, anything to get me out of the situation that I was in, there was always a reason for why it couldn't happen. But I was always, meeting expectations, and I was always doing good work, but I wasn't doing enough good work. And so I was just like, all right, well, who controls how you define good? And I said, I'm going to play the game and, let them tell me what they want me to do and do it to the best of my ability. But I'm going to use the time outside of those hours to really build something for myself. And entrepreneurship was always a goal. I just didn't know what it was going to look like, what form or shape it was going to take. And fell into personal finance on the education side, and said, hey, like, this is a lane, this is where people, have a need. And so I'm going to explore that.
I have a lot of questions. I'll try to keep focused here, and I think I'm going to come back to some of the bigger buckets towards the end here, actually. So I think the more relevant question here, and something a lot of people I feel are dealing with the great reshuffle, the great resignation, is why are employees, it feels like, so against their own employees' growth? It seems like they try to rein you in. It seems like in your experience, they try to, rather than support your light, support your shine, it's like that's a threat to this organization, that's a threat to this company. Do you have an opinion on why so many employers seem to take that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's all a guess, right? I can't go into any of these people's minds and make the assessment. But I think that the big fear was what ended up happening, right? That my talent was going to be realized by me, and that I was going to take it somewhere else. I agree. And during that period of time, I even made statements that kind of alluded to the fact that, hey, use me, right? Use this skill set. But the leadership that I had was very traditional in terms of their approach and in terms of what they felt was appropriate pacing for growth. I think that my rapid growth spoke to maybe some insecurity that they had around, what their experience was, right? If I spent 20 years to get to a position at a director's level, and this guy just comes in, in his late 20s, early 30s, and he's only spent 5 or 10, what does that say about me? And, the things that I was accomplishing were things that I was accomplishing for me, but I also realized many people never accomplish, right? A lot of people are afraid to write books, or for whatever reason, never approach it because they don't know how to. A lot of people, are afraid of public speaking, so they'll never apply to be a TEDx speaker. And I just had this audacity to try that I think from maybe older traditionalist views could be viewed as recklessness or maybe even arrogance. But it, from my perspective, it's just confidence, right? Throwing my hat into the ring. If they say no, they say no. If they say yes, then, great for me. And fortunately, in a lot of these instances, there were yeses, but, that doesn't take away from the hard work that it took for me to get to that point, or even the courage that it took for me to get to that point. And so yeah, I think I became their worst nightmare or archetype for what, their worst nightmare looks like, in saying, hey, if you don't receive or leverage or appreciate the value that I have, I'm going to take it somewhere else.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that honest response too. I know one's a deep conversation. That's why I'm trying to figure out the order that I want to go here. So I'll hit the shallow when I think a shallow dive is, foreshadowing for the audience, the deep one's coming. Awesome. How do you prepare for entrepreneurship? Did you have because it sounds like you weren't forecasting for that. So did you have 3-6 months savings and, traditional 12 months, or did you just say, I have this belief in myself that I can support myself outside of the workforce? So for that person who, season 3 is the transition, how do they make that transition, or would you recommend they prepare for that transition?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's a combination of both. Being in the personal finance space, I knew the importance of paying yourself first and saving and investing. I wouldn't necessarily say that I planned for an emergency per se, but I was definitely putting money away. And that was one of the contributing factors to my feeling prepared, if we can call it that, right, to leave my job. I had to take inventory of what it is that I had in terms of assets. So I felt really good about that. I gave myself a timeline of, this is how long I can live off of these assets before things get real. And the timeline was definitely too short.
Yeah.
But, I think that's kind of some of the growing pains that come with entrepreneurship, especially if you are trailblazing the experience, right? I didn't have anybody in my direct circle who had done what it was that I was doing. So I had to look outside of that. And a lot of the relationships that I've built through social media have kind of helped propel this forward from a perspective of, all right, I know this is possible, but like, what exactly do I need to do to become successful? And social media sensationalizes the wins, but doesn't really talk about the losses or, the hard parts of navigating this, especially from a mindset perspective. And so I would say for anybody who's looking to make that jump, definitely be prepared financially, but more than that, understand too, like, you're going to get to know yourself in a way that maybe you never had the opportunity to. And all of the doubt, insecurity, imposter syndrome, like the things that you hear on that end are real. It's making a choice every single day to believe in yourself, to have faith, to, reject scarcity in the face of an empty bank account or in between, what payments look like. And it's being resourceful in your approach. I think one of the biggest shifts for me mentally working in corporate to full-time entrepreneurship is that corporate America and what's the word? Before corporate, you get the socialization from elementary school and high school and, college even, tells you that you can only be good at one thing, right? Or you can only be great at one thing. And so focus your attention on being great at that one thing. You're not allowed to be great at a lot of different things, because who does that, right? Some of the direct feedback that I've received in corporate from my leadership, multiple leaders, was, you're a jack of all trades, Rahkim, but you're not specialized in anything. And so you could be good at anything that you want to do, but that's going to hold you back. Why don't you buckle down and focus on one thing? And my kind of rebuttal, at least internally, was always, well, I'm doing these things, right? Like I'm writing a book, I'm speaking at TED, I'm meeting expectations on my job. So why can't I be good at all of these things? But that programming did impact me and continues to impact me even in full-time entrepreneurship, where I've had to look at money-making opportunities through a lens of breaking down those barriers. So I can be good at speaking and get paid for that. I can be good at writing and get paid for that. I can be good at social media and get paid for that, right? Like, not limiting yourself to getting paid through one vein has been a game changer for me, because what I left my job thinking that I was going to do to survive, to make money, was coaching. And I've made less money coaching than I've made writing, for instance, or speaking, for instance. And so if I close myself to the opportunities that came financially through writing and through speaking, and I was just focusing on getting money from coaching, not only would I be disenchanted with this experience, but I very likely would have gone back to work by now.
I appreciate that. Obviously, the eyes are rolling back because I have questions and people know how I'll get off topics. I'll stay focused here because I know we're about to take a little bit of a pivot here. You said you wrote 2 books. Can you hit what those 2 books are for the people that want to find those?
Yeah, so the first book is titled Mentorship, the Playbook, and I published that in 2018. The second book is titled Financially Irresponsible, and that was published 2019. 2 completely different topics. But I think as my brand kind of grows, that the common thread, as I kind of mentioned in the beginning, is around empowerment. Like, how do you show up as a complete and empowered human being? So both are available on Amazon. Mentorship talks about my experiences growing up with different mentors and how you define mentorship. The intent in the book was to speak from the voice of both a mentor and a mentee and how to maximize what the relationship can look like. And then Financially Irresponsible also talks about a lot of my experiences financially and just kind of the things that I've learned, the tools that I've used. Talks a lot about mindset, talks about strategies, and it really speaks to, and why I love this book, it really speaks to my experience as a Black man. I think personal finance is often kind of white labeled as, you know, this is what everybody has to do and everybody's starting from the same footing. And I don't believe that. I think it's important for us to acknowledge history and culture in financial education that says, as a Black person, what are the obstacles that we might face in the financial arena, right? I tell a story in the book about going to a car dealership, looking to buy a car with cash in my pocket and a pre-approval letter. And I was treated like, you know, somebody who was just coming in to waste their time because I had a fitted hat on and some Timbs. And when they realized that I had the pre-approval letter that was giving me a rate much better than what they were offering and that I had cash in my hand, all of a sudden the treatment changed. But at that point, I was no longer interested in doing business with them. So I think where a lot of Black people in particular, especially if they don't have background in finance or financial education, get stuck at is the obstacle, right? You know, the man did this or the man does that. And so because of that, we can't progress. And my argument would be, yes, there is the obstacle, but how do we navigate around the obstacle to be successful rather than just kind of giving up hope and, you know, letting life happen?
This is coincidental, but a great segue actually to the conversation that I wanted to have. You were my first invite to a Spaces on Twitter for, this is not where I'm going with this, but for the Tinder swindler.
Yeah.
So I ended up having 2 discussions around that. So I appreciate that first invite. But in that discussion, and then this week, for you, I was talking about your tweets as we were building up to this conversation. You were really trying to give the perspective and bring me into the conversation around the perspective of navigating finances, period, as a Black man, and really as a Black individual, since that was across the globe. And then this week you had a tweet, and I don't have it here in front of me, it'll probably be through the magic of editing on the YouTube video, where you were defining the difference between Black and African American. And that one blew up, and I think it had like 100,000 impressions.
Jeez.
So for the people who weren't privy to that conversation,